So, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the second plenary session, which will deep dive into the data gaps and solution for the most vulnerable children. This session objective is to explore and address data gaps and identify solutions for enhancing the collection, analysis, sharing, and use of data on the most vulnerable children on the move. And in this session, we will examine the ongoing challenges, opportunities, and good practices from country, regional, and global perspectives, highlighting notable initiatives and international processes. And special focus will be given to the current state of data on vulnerable population, including missing migrant children, unaccompanied and separated children, trafficked and smuggled children, and stateless children to improve data-driven responses and protection measures. So to respond to all these goals, we have a fantastic group of speakers that I will introduce. First, we have Ms. Andrea Garcia Borja from the Missing Migrant Project at IOM. We also have Yunju Park, Statistics and Data Analysis Officer at UNHCR. We then have Dr. Gabriela Sanchez, social and cultural anthropologist at Georgetown University. Unfortunately, she is not present with us now, but she will be joining remotely. Next, we have Piotr Yukno, team leader from the Statistical Office of the European Union, Eurostat. And next, we have Madame Cécile Toro, data and policy analyst at OECD, who was the moderator for the previous session. And we have finally Mr. Athanasios Tanopoulos, the president of the Hellenic Statistical Authority, Elstat. And my name is Omar Moussa Ali. I am from the Institute of Statistics of Djibouti, and it's my great honor today to moderate this session. So without further ado, I will call on my colleague Andrea Garcia from IOM to talk a little bit about documenting death and disappearance of children during migration journeys. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Omar, and thank you to the IDAC Secretariat, to the organizers of the conference, and to the State of Morocco for welcoming us today here. My name is Andrea Garcia, and I am a project officer for IOM's Missing Migrants Project. First of all, let me give you a very, very brief introduction to what we do at the Missing Migrants Project, which is to document the number of deaths and disappearances that happen during migration journeys around the world. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm supposed to do it. It's okay, it doesn't say much. I can go on like that. Again, so the Missing Migrants Project, thank you, has an open access global database in which we document the number of deaths and disappearances during migration. And this is one of the very few measures of how safe or unsafe migration really is. Our data informs GCM Objective 8 on saving lives and also SDG Indicator 10.7.3. And we do a lot of data analysis, advocacy, and thematic awareness raising on the topic. Today, we're obviously going to be talking about children specifically, and tragically, the deaths of those children, of children on the move. And let me start by saying that usually the term missing migrant children is referred to children who are either unaccompanied or separated from their parents and then go into the custody of the state and subsequently go missing. But that is not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking specifically about the children who died or went missing during their migration journeys. So really about the most vulnerable of them. And as you all know, and as the speakers have already been talking about before me, children who travel irregularly face many, many risks throughout their journeys, and sometimes actually too often. As I was saying, 3,820 deaths is only the minimum estimate, and the real number is much, much larger. We just don't know how large. That is the data gap. But yeah, even this 3,800 seems like a small number, but for me that I work on it, I see migrant deaths or children deaths almost every day. And if you think about it, 3,800 deaths is almost one death per day that we have been over the period of time that we have been recording migrant deaths. So it's really terrible. It is a true humanitarian crisis. And while the data may not show how big the magnitude is, it's really urgent that we collect better data so we can better address. I hesitated to share much data because we know that the data gap is so big and the data that we have is so flawed, but I will just give you two trends that I identified in the data. First of all is about where the deaths take place. So Southeastern Asia is the second region with the most recorded deaths of children on the move, whereas it's only the sixth overall for all deaths recorded on the move, so those of children and adults. That shows that in Southeastern Asia, there's either more children migrating within the population or more children on the move within the population, and or that the risks that children face in Southeastern Asia are distinctly more threatening to their lives than those that adults face. The second trend that I want to highlight is that children are thankfully less likely to suffer a violent death than adults across the world, but they are more likely to die of sickness and lack of access to healthcare. I'm gonna go through some of the challenges specifically to documenting migrant children deaths really quickly. So first of all, it's challenging. So how it's distinctly different to adults, because in general, the information of migrant deaths often doesn't include information on the age of the victim or the sex of the victim or any kind of identifying information. We often know that just one death took place. Then also because often the remains of migrants are not recovered, but when they are recovered, it is unlikely that they are identified as children, unless they are really young children or infants, then that's when they are identified as children. But if they are adolescents, it's less likely that they are identified as minors. It also depends on the state of the remains, whether they can easily be identified as children or not. And finally, children are more likely to be identified as such if they are traveling with their families or with someone from their community that could identify who they were. So again, the data gap is very, very large. And just to point it out, we have two data gaps that we are trying to tackle with our work on the following year. First, the number of recorded deaths that we have already recorded within the 70,000 that were not identified as children, but are actually children. As I said, very few of our data has information or sex and age. So within those 70,000, there could be more children that aren't identified as such now. And finally, the other data gap is the number of children deaths that have not been recorded. As an innovative solution that we're trying to pilot next year is that of coming up with estimates, given that it's really, really hard to document these deaths. We're trying to see if with the data that is available, we can come up with statistically sound estimates on the magnitude of the issue. And depending on how of how good they are, we will see if they can be used for maybe advocacy, just to give a rough estimate of the issue, or if they are better, then they could be used for policy and programming. And to conclude, I just want to say that Again, these 3,820 children are not just numbers, they are really families and communities left behind. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We really need a lot more investment so that we can better document the risks that people on the move face and how these translate into children deaths. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this beautiful presentation. I'm very happy to be sitting next to you because we've worked and we exchanged extensively on integrating questions on our census questionnaire to capture missing migrants through our population and housing census. And so next I will give the floor to Yunju Park, who will talk on the data on stateless children. Yunju.
So, hello everyone. My name is Hyunju Park. I'm a Statistics and Data Analysis Officer working at UNHCR, Global Data Service of UNHCR. I'm going to talk about the data of stateless children, and we have similar challenges for this group of population, like missing migrants. It's underrecorded. We have more scarce data for children. Should I? And like Tarek described in the previous session, I'm gonna start from the legal and statistical definitions, but I'm gonna emphasize more on statistical definition because I'm a statistician. So who are stateless people? Legally, they are defined as someone who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. It is stated in the 1954 Convention for Statelessness. Statistically, UNHCR collects data for statelessness and those having undetermined nationality. And this group is divided into stateless people and also persons with undetermined nationality. And of course, we have international recommendation for statelessness statistics, IROS. They are not fully aligned at this point, unfortunately, but for the overall figure of stateless or undetermined nationality and stateless persons and those without a recognized nationality status in IROS, they are aligned. But for the disaggregated part, they are not fully aligned. So we are working on that to have the alignment with the EGRIS recommendation. So the difference is actually for the group B in IROS is persons with recognized statelessness status, but in the stateless people group of UNHCR's definition has those with unrecognized statelessness status as well. So that's the difference for the disaggregation, but we are working on that. Then I'm gonna move to the data part. So how many there are for stateless people? Globally, we have 4.4 million stateless people, but it's very well known that it's an underestimate. We think that there are many, many more stateless people in the world. And for the number of the children, we have 1.5 million, but there are also more data gap for children. And there are some countries we know that there are stateless people, but those countries don't report about this population group. On the left-hand side, you see the trends of stateless people. So there is a small bump from 2016 to 2017 because we started to include the Rohingya refugees in the statistics. That's why the trend went increase. And also from 2020, we started to increase those who are refugees, but at the same time, there are statelessness people, mainly in high-income countries. So you see small changes in that year as well. And on the right-hand side, you see the number of stateless people and how many are children among them. But again, we do not have full data for here, especially for children. So we don't have the full breakdown by age and sex for this group, unfortunately. So it makes that when for the underestimated 4.4 million stateless people, the number of the children is even more underestimated, unfortunately. So we can divide actually the stateless people into stateless who are displaced and stateless, and who are non-displaced and stateless at the same time. For the example of the displaced and the stateless would be Rohingya refugees. So they don't have nationality and they are refugees at the same time. And there are non-displaced and statelessness. The example would be those stateless people in Cote d'Ivoire. The demographic breakdown for these groups are quite different. So we think that there are like the 80% of the demographic breakdown for the displaced statelessness. But for the non-displaced statelessness, we have only 66% of the demographic breakdown. So it seems like we have less children for the non-displaced statelessness, but it could be because of we don't have enough sufficiently breaking down data for this group. So that's a huge data gap here. Sorry, I might be struggling with this, but okay. So the next, I wanted to show you where are these stateless people. So as you can see, for the majority of these population groups are in Southeast Asia, and somehow it's quite similar to missing migrants. So the highest number you see in Bangladesh, and I made the distinction between displaced and non-displaced people. And like I mentioned, the majority of this group, the highest number are found in Bangladesh who are Rohingyas. And there are also stateless people in Cote d'Ivoire, Myanmar, and Thailand, and other countries. And those other countries include like Latvia, Syria, Malaysia, Russia, and Kuwait. For the children, the ranks are similar, but very slight switch between Bangladesh and Cote d'Ivoire, but still the highest number of children who are stateless are in those two countries. Then I'm going to talk about so what kind of efforts UNHCR have been making to improve the data in this population group for overall, because like I mentioned, the data is already, the data gap is already huge for the whole population group, but of course, what we are doing to improve the data for children. So the first one I wanted to show you is the UNHCR's data product. We published the global trends and media trends, and there is a dedicated chapter about stateless people. Then, yeah, we do some analysis with the data we collect about this stateless population. And for the annual update, which is published in the Global Trends, we have the breakdown of demographics. So you can find the data about children of this population group. And all those data are published in the Refugee Data Finder, and you can find the data in the public domain. And the majority of this group is in Asia and the Pacific. So the regional office has been making a lot of efforts to improve this data. So the regional office also publishes a similar report from the Global Trends. So it's called the Asia and the Pacific Regional Trends Report. And there is a dedicated section, of course, about stateless people. And I wanted to mention that there was a huge improvement, achievement just last month. So the Thai cabinet approved a pathway to permanent residency and nationality for about 500,000 stateless people in Thailand. So this will be reflected in our end 2024 statistics in the next update. So we expect that the number to be decreased next year. And UNHCR has been introducing some survey program, which is called Results Monitoring Surveys, RMS. And the surveys were conducted in the Bangladesh, Malaysia, Myanmar, and India. And because of the Rohingya population, we have some data, rich information from these surveys about Rohingya refugees. So the regional office is conducting the analysis now, so it will be available very soon. And in Kenya, there are known stateless people, and with the EGRIS recommendation using IRRS, the international recommendation for refugee statistics. 2019 Kenya population census included the module about to identify refugees, in addition to having the option for stateless in the nationality question. So it was possible to capture this population group, stateless people in Kenya, fortunately. And in the same year, there was a socioeconomic study of the Shona community. So Shona community is one of the communities of who are stateless in Kenya. There is a policy brief which analyzed this data, and you can find the microdata of that survey as well. This is the last slide. So there are some relationship between birth registration and statelessness, but it's not really well studied yet. So there was a report from Southern Africa region for SADC, and this is not really data product, but it sees the relationship between birth registration and stateless at the risk of being statelessness. And the report recommends that international community has to put more efforts to understand the relationship between these two aspects. And lastly, there was a study in Côte d'Ivoire. It's about the at-risk population who are being statelessness in Côte d'Ivoire. You can find the microdata and the report online as well. So for this population group, the report found that the risk being statelessness is not that huge, but about the half of the surveyed population for this study only have a birth certificate or their equivalent. So there should be more improvements for to make these people to be less vulnerable. I think that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid. Next, I will give the floor to Piotr to address gaps in data on unaccompanied minors in the European Union. Piotr, you have 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I would like to make a short link to the previous presentation because it just reminds me how important it is to speak. You hear me well? Sorry. Okay, because it reminds me actually how important it is to be aware and to speak about the certain gaps, because often the solutions are very close to us. In the specific context of the data on statelessness, for instance, we have discovered that we do have data of which we were aware, but we are not aware of the user needs, so to say. In that way, it was very easy for us to make the data better available and visible to everyone. Now, coming to my presentation, thank you. I would like to present something very specific, because data gaps, of course, in the area of children on the move are much wider, and I would start actually with that what was said at the early morning, that we need to know about what is happening with these children, what are the reception facilities, how are the protection of their rights, are they in the education, what is the social inclusion situation of those. But in my presentation, I would like specifically to talk about the unaccompanied minor statistics and what we have been doing to improve this specific type of information. In the European Union, data collections generally working on the basis of the specific legislation. This, of course, allows us, Eurostat as a statistical office of the Union, to ensure that the data will be sent to us, they will have a sufficient quality, data will be comparable. Of course, this makes the life of the statisticians so much easier in that sense. But of course, this prevents from, let's say, responding to more spontaneously and quickly to emerging needs. And for instance, the crisis in 2015 and 16 were showing very clearly where we are. Because I think when I started with the implementation of the regulation from 2007, which is the basis of our data collection in this area, so statistics on migration and international protection, we were so extremely happy that we have a legal basis, we have so much information now, and from the 1st of January 2008, we will have such a great variety of information, will satisfy every user. But the trouble is that, of course, the legislation has to pass through the legal process, which also includes negotiations, and this then leads often to not necessarily addressing all the needs that were identified and would deserve to be addressed, but certain level of diplomacy, negotiations of different stakeholders has to be taken into account to ensure that the legislation is passed. So then at the end of the day, we noticed that some of the needs were not fully addressed. And here, on the basis of this regulation, and that's also important, we're collecting four types of statistics. So asylum data, which includes applications and decisions, so-called Dublin statistics, which is about the responsibility of a specific member state, EU member state, for the asylum seeker, in the case person has entered through one country and should have been considered as an asylum applicant or was an asylum applicant, but the person moved to another EU country on the basis of this of the Dublin regulation, so-called Dublin regulation. There is an assessment which country should be responsible. Then there is a third area, enforcement of immigration legislation on so these are the data on irregular migrants, and the fourth one is residence permits, addressing the statistics on legal migration. This data mostly are collected monthly, quarterly, annual periodicity, monthly, quarterly, dream of any statistician, having such a quick information available, and we do have age, sex, citizenship, plus some other breakdowns in the data, but age and sex, this was already collected for all the statistics that I'm saying here. This is already collected. Unfortunately, for the unaccompanied minors, the only thing we were having was the annual number of asylum applicants, and that was it. Oh, now I have to go back once. Okay, so I was referring already to the data gaps, how we were addressing them, because we didn't want to immediately start another review of the legislation, because this legal process takes years. So we were addressing them partly through the voluntary data collections with agreement of the EU countries, and we found these gaps in different areas. But most importantly, this gap was identified for the data on unaccompanied minors. As I said, we only have one annual figure on unaccompanied minors applying for asylum in the EU by age, sex, citizenship. So that was already something, but it was telling us nothing about what is happening with them. So what we made, instead of developing specific voluntary data collections, because introducing breakdown by unaccompanied minors would require very significant changes, and that's quite costly, so we need an agreement of the member states to do it. So we made a proposal in May 2018, and this proposal was adopted in 2020 in the regulation. That was amending the regulation that I was showing at the beginning from the 2007. So that was quickly applicable from January 21, so a year after. And this has led to really incremental improvements of the data availability. And I must admit, to a large extent, these improvements were not just to the European Commission, but also through the initiative of the European Parliament, which was also underlining that the information on unaccompanied minors is essential. So what we know much more, so not just that they are asylum applicants or first-time applicants or maybe subsequent applicants. We have the data by monthly or on a monthly basis instead, as we had before, annually. We know we know also the stock numbers. We know those applicants, the numbers on those who have withdrawn the application. We have also the numbers on those processed in the accelerated procedure. This would deserve another discussion, but it's also a very important area. We also know what are the decisions, what's actually happening with those children, if they are granted protection or not, and if granted, what kind of protection. And these decisions data are even more, they are disaggregated by the first instance and final instance. Again, for the statisticians or policymakers, it's actually very important information. We also know we have the information about the resettled unaccompanied minors. That's also part of the data collection. So as you see, compared to the situation when we only had the data annual figure on asylum applications, it was really not just significant, but really incremental improvement. And all this data are made online, are available to everyone on Eurostat database. So sorry, I lost the, but I think it's basically, I also had some few slides with a few of the figures, but it's representing that what I was showing here. So in terms of the key findings, just the latest information, for instance, in 23, there were 41,000 applications from the unaccompanied minors in the EU plus Norway, which represents actually only 4% of all the first-time applicants and 16% of all applications lodged by the minors. But this looks relatively low, but of course you have to know the information and the trends have to be observed. Oh, I was not aware actually that you can see the presentation. So I'm very sorry because I see the black screen here. Yes. So in terms of the decisions, there were 16,000 in 23. There were 16,000 first instance decisions on the applications. And you see different type of status, also refugee status, subsidiary protection, humanitarian status. These are the three different type of outcomes. Then in terms of the composition, Syrians and Afghans are by far the largest groups of unaccompanied minors asylum seekers in the EU. I made already a link to the fact that this is very similar to that what is happening in the other regions in the world. Germany, Netherlands, and Austria are the main countries when it comes, but it's also very much similar with the other asylum trends in the EU. And maybe the last slide. Yes. Sorry. To show you that there are also more frequent information. So possibly from the last data release that we have made in August this year, there were nearly 3,000 unaccompanied minors in 1 month applying, and most of them, nearly 40%, were coming from Syria. So, and this is just a peak of the iceberg. There is much more. There are data on returns of irregular migrants, which actually also include unaccompanied minors in some of the cases. And I think with that, I will close.
Thank you very much, Piotr. So that was great. I want to give the floor to Dr. Gabriela Sanchez, who is online. I really apologize. I broke my glasses before coming, so I could not see the name well. So she was supposed to present before Piotr. Gabriela, can you hear us? awesome. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be there with you. Although unfortunately I'm having to do it all the way from here, from the dark in the middle of the night in the States. But it is I'm very excited and very grateful for the invitation. My name is Gabriela Sanchez, and I'm a research fellow at Georgetown University's Collaborative on Global Children's Issues. And this morning, I would like to share with you some of the findings from our data on the participation of young people on migrant smuggling and what this actually tells us about the global dynamics of the crime. So if we can share the slides, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if they are coming up, but in the meanwhile, while they show up, we can go ahead and get started. When I talk about migrant smuggling, we are actually talking about the facilitation of the entry of a person into a country different from their own. This is facilitated, in the case that it is assisted, it is also consensual. And according to Article 3, and we can go to the next slide, the protocol of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, one of the key elements of migrant smuggling is the fact that there is a material benefit. Somebody gets compensated, in some way to facilitate that transit. Contrary to, common perception, and smuggling is a crime against the state, not against the person. And this is according to the protocol. Other countries, and we'll see that in a second, have different approaches and different definitions in terms of who the victim is when we talk about smuggling. Smuggling is also facilitated by a wide range of actors. Many times we hear that it is transnational organized crime, the one that is behind them. What the data has actually shown is that it is quite often migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers themselves, because they actually are the people with the knowledge, the ones that facilitate some of these transits. And it's also facilitated by community-based groups. And it's very much based on trust. But another element that I want us not to forget, migrant smuggling is different from human trafficking, which involves coercion and intimidation and the extraction of somebody's work or labor product. But today we're only focusing on smuggling. Next slide, please. So why are children smuggled? From a human rights, community-based perspective, the work that we do at the collaborative approaches smuggling as a mechanism of protection, given the lack of legal pathways for children, or for many children, around the world to move. So smuggling in the communities that rely on it, is seen as a mechanism of protection. There's often the impression that parents don't know what they are doing, or we criminalize the parents quite often, saying that we can't believe that they are putting their children in this kind of situation. But parents are fully aware of the risks that are connected to irregular migration. But given the lack of these pathways, given the lack of these options for them to move regularly, smuggling provides a very sheer, very thin veneer of protection. The smuggler, the facilitator, has the knowledge to get through borders, has the contact many times through many of these agencies that regulate and control border enforcement, so that the children and the families can cross. And it's very important to keep in mind that despite all of these perceptions that smuggling is inherently criminal, and not all smuggling facilitation is exploitative or violent. There's, once again, this element of trust, of community, of solidarity that is very much connected to the processes that lead to people migrate, that lead people to migrate. Thank you. Next, please. But in fact, we know very little, and I think this is in line with what everybody else has been talking about this morning. We know very little about the smuggling because smuggled migrants are not legally considered victims unless they have sustained an injury, unless they have died, or any other tragic element, has been connected to their journey. Most of them are often returned or deported. Another element, and this is part of the findings that a study that is coming up with IOM, and that I am part of, is going to share in the next few weeks. Most people, who are involved in the enforcement of smuggling do not know what the crime entails. Also, because most countries lack smuggling legislation, although they may penalize very similar actions. Another challenge that we have at identifying what is happening is that the national legislation is most of the time not in line with the international protocol, and this is the UNODC protocol on smuggling. And since we have so many definitions, it is very difficult at the end to identify, to collect, or to analyze, smuggling incidents. In countries, even if they have that data, many times lack protocols to collect it, what makes it hard, to access any kind of reliable information or to make it available or to translate it into policy and research findings. Next, please. And as Andrea was saying earlier, we know even less about children because of the lack of disaggregated data. Many of the children are, also travel with their families or are again immediately returned. And this is many times in the case of the Americas and some countries, across other parts of the world. And many times the children are also welcomed into protection systems. And this is, primarily the case in the US, in the UK, and to some degree, like in also in other countries around the world. But many times there is this focus on protection and to immediately provide services, what distracts us from collecting information about smuggling activities and also smuggling experiences. Next, please. What we do know a little bit about children in smuggling, what their experiences are like, and also some of the trends that are connected to their actual participation in smuggling. We have data on teenagers and young people who travel on their own, and many times they are, the parents, the relatives make a significant investment so that the children can travel, again, with this perception that they're going to travel more safely, that they travel alone or if they travel on their own. But we also have data that shows that many children, and these are mostly young men, teenagers, often pay off their fees by working for smuggling crews or also just independently, trying to make it to their destination. We have available data from the case of Libya, Tunisia, some from Morocco, Mexico, and Venezuela. And on Wednesday, we're going to be sharing some of our findings from the work. Some of the pictures that you're seeing here are from children who were apprehended in the context of smuggling. Next slide, please. This data has allowed us to see that there's specific challenges that children face, when they are, in this case, apprehended for facilitating their own journeys. First of all, this goes against the protocol, against the UNODC protocol on smuggling, since a smuggled migrant cannot be convicted or cannot be charged with the smuggling according to the protocol. Again, individual countries have the right to establish their legislation, and they have taken different approaches. But the data that is available at this point suggests that the number of children that are being apprehended, in the context of immigration raids or rescues is growing. Just to give you a quick introduction to what we're going to talk about on Wednesday. On the Mexican case along the US-Mexico border, the numbers went from 830 children being apprehended for facilitating border crossings in 2020 to 1,993 by 2023. So the numbers may also reveal, levels of victimization, that we have probably not seen before, related to the involvement of children in activities that are very dangerous to people like themselves. We're also confronted with a lack of understanding of the dimensions of the crime and what it actually entails. And the sentences are very severe. We have colleagues at the University of Oxford at Border Criminologists who just released a report suggesting that many times children are being charged as adults for their participation in smuggling. And in particular, we have the case of Ibrahim Abra, who was just sentenced to 9 years in prison for piloting a boat. And he did so to help the people who were on board of the boat. Next slide, please. This is, I think one of my last slides, but I think that this morning we've been hearing all about the tragedy that is connected to the lives of children, and in many cases, why it is so hard to find them. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that IDAC today, or in the next few days, is also going to talk about how we can incorporate children into our research initiatives. I think that we do find hope when it comes to when we realize that there's more researchers, more organizations with this civic mobilization that shows that there is data and that it can be collected and used for policy products. So there's more data sources from academia, from civil society that is being collected by ordinary citizens that is revealing the criminalization disparities that impact migrant youth that is involved in, or young people who are involved in the facilitation of migrant smuggling. On Wednesday, I will share with you some information about youth-led initiatives, how we can incorporate, how we should incorporate the young people into the collection of the data and the analysis and the reporting. I think they are having their experiences and their own perspectives inform policy, but they're also having them relating what matters to them and what can solve some of the issues that they face is critical. And so for that, I think the participation of young people as political actors and also as policy advocates pushing for change is going to be critical if we want to gather quality data when it comes to smuggling. And the next slide, please. I'm very grateful for your time, and I look forward to the Q&A section. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Gabriela, for this insightful presentation. So I will give the floor to Cécile next for 8 minutes to walk us through some of the good practices and challenges in collecting data on the integration of migrant children in the OECD countries.
Thank you, Omar. So yes, I will bring the OECD perspective and will present some insights from the forthcoming IDAC OECD brief that we're going to publish this year. So in a nutshell, the results I'm going to present here come from the publication Settling In, which is a compilation of indicators of immigrant integration. This is what you find in the middle on this slide. So this is a joint OECD-EU statistical compendium that gather like 80 plus indicators. And one chapter is dedicated to children of immigrants that we define as immigrants, but also children born in the receiving country of two foreign-born, two immigrant parents. This publication, so this is the 4th edition. We started back in 2012. So the good thing of it is that we can monitor, see the progress, compare OECD countries. And we used to say that there's no one single champion because depending on the area you're covering, education, health, living conditions, access to the labor market, there are a lot of differences, but the good thing in this international comparison is that countries can single out some issues, some commonalities in the policy areas they're facing, and they can see where they stand compared to comparable countries, not, again, comparing apple and orange, but we also group countries according to the composition of their migration population. So and you know how indicators work. We'll go into this with Diego and Karima later. Indicators, it's a kind of, it's a bit, in a sense, it's a bit a reduction of information. It has to be easy to understand, simple, but in this matter, what is really important is to take on board the composition of the population we're looking at, and this is what we try to do in this publication. On the top of this statistical publication, you'll find in the public domain on our website some country and regional reports. I flagged the most recent one, a publication, the green one, that is the integration outcome in the Latin America and the Caribbean. We are also doing a lot of country reviews. I show here the state of immigrant integration in Germany. And on the policy side, we publish some booklet on different topic, entry program, family reunification policies, and I flagged the one on young people with migrant parents. So what do we learn from last publication, Settling In? As of 2020, an estimated 25 million children under the age of 15 in the OECD were either foreign-born, 4% of the age group, or born to two foreign-born parents, representing the second group represent 15%. So altogether, they represent 19% of children under 15 in the OECD. EU-wide, the proportion is slightly lower due to a slightly lower share of native-born children of foreign-born parents, 12%. In terms of representation of receiving countries, nearly 1 out of 2 reside in the US, in the case of children with 2 foreign-born parents, around 10% in the UK and in Germany each, and 8% in France. It gives you the main host country of the so-called second generation, but don't really like this terminology because, well, they're not migrant themselves. But just to finish on figures, of all 5.8 million foreign-born children, 10% reside in the US, 5% in Germany, and 4% in the UK. So looking at the evolution since 2010, the share of children of immigrants increased in most OECD countries. Largest increases were recorded in Belgium, Italy, Norway, Ireland, and the UK. We also present some characteristics in the publication, such as disaggregation by age at arrival, the region of parental origin, but have some difficulties to track proficiency in the official language, which is really key to understand how children, in a sense, perform in the country of where their parents have been immigrating. We'll come to this in a second. So what I wanted to flag, which is really the basic and a very important element, is the standard of living of immigrant households. So again, giving an average, over 40% children under 16 in immigrant households live in relative poverty in the OECD. We're using the same definition as Eurostat in this regard. In the EU, 1 in 3 immigrant children live in relative poverty, and shares are the highest, as you can see on this slide, in Spain, with more than 60% of them living in relative poverty. The US, 1 in 2. Sweden and the Netherlands are next. So as you can see here, and again, I forgot to mention that in all this work on indicators, on integration, what we try to do is to compare population groups, so comparing immigrant with native-born as a whole, and comparing native-born children of immigrant parents with natives of having no immigrant parents. So that's why that you see 2 bars each time, so you can see the gap between the 2 groups, and we can see in this sense the evolution over time when you look back in time. So lower incomes among immigrant households affect housing conditions, and as immigrants are overall more likely to reside in urban areas, work in low-paid jobs, and on average live in larger households, their children are at higher risk of living in overcrowded housing. And we know that growing up in overcrowded accommodation impact children's and young people's schools performance, well-being, health, and can cause a lifelong harm. So, and really important aspect of integration of children in OECD countries is their participation in early education. By ECEC, we mean all the formal childcare and preschool services defined as paid care services for children aged 2 to 5, just before the obligatory education, just before they integrate the obligatory education system. So there are a bunch of literature on this topic, and what they show is basically that participating in those programs have positive effects on children's cognitive and social development, especially for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So participation in some type of preschool education is relatively widespread, with some exception, like what you can see on the screen, the US and Australia. But basically, in European countries, the participation is relatively quite high, even if we can notice some gap between children of immigrants and others in some countries. This is the case that you can see from the slide in the Netherlands and in Italy. There is, however, no significant gap in their participation, their attendance, in German-speaking countries, in Spain, and in the US. So after controlling for socioeconomic background, this is what I said at the beginning, that we try to take on board some of the characteristics of the households and of the migrants themselves. Pre-primary schooling retains a benefit equivalent to half a year of schooling for children of immigrants. EU-wide, the advantage in reading skills associated with pre-primary schooling remains major, even after accounting for socioeconomic background. So this is in this sense that it's an area that we cover a lot, and since it has very strong policy implications for countries, trying to push children overall from disadvantaged background, and in some countries, children of immigrants are more representative in this group. That is definitively a policy area of high interest for OECD countries. So the type of results I gave you, accounting for socioeconomic background, come from the PISA round. And, well, we could go into more details into the data gap we have here, because those results are for not the full cohort of children, but for those age 15 only. So moving more broadly to the performance at school of children of immigrants, you may know that there are our colleague at the education department are producing an international survey called PISA every 3 years. And what we can notice from those PISA round is that since 2009, children of immigrants improved their reading scores in 2 out of 3 OECD countries, which is quite a positive result, and they improved more than children of natives, meaning that within a decade, overall, not going into the details of subgroups or national results, overall, there's a kind of reduced gap between the two groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are running out of time.
Okay. So in a nutshell,
minute.
what's it's really interesting to pick from the PISA round is to account for socioeconomic background. And you see from this slide that you have big gaps between children of immigrant and children of native school performance, especially in all those countries on the right side of the graph. But when you account for the socioeconomic background, you reduce the gap, but you don't feel it completely, notably in Europe. So there's a whole chapter on the impact of the concentration of immigrants in the same schools that has some impact on housing. So I don't have time to go into too many details, but just to flag that why we're producing all these indicators, why we have been doing this for now more than 10 years, is that those results have some implication for policy considerations. We'll not come back to the participation in preschool program. The fact that immigrant parents have high aspiration for their children as any other families, but they often lack knowledge about the functioning of the education system and labor market. Discrimination is also an underappreciated factor, and awareness about it needs to be raised. And at last but not least, concentration of socioeconomic disadvantages coincides with the concentration of students with immigrant parents. It requires a mix of both education and housing policies. So I will skip this slide and I put the reference to our website. Everything is publicly available, not always easy to find. So feel free to come to me if you need to access all this data or if you need to access national countries, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cécile, for this insightful presentation and all these amazing figures that you shared with us. So we have less than 12 minutes. I will give the floor to our last presenter, who is Athanasios, who will talk about how the European statistical system and its partners can address the critical data gaps. And then, depending on how fast he will finish, we will have a few minutes for Q&A before we wrap up the session.
So thank you, Omar, a lot and thanks a lot for the invitation. And I'm apparently the lucky person coming last. And well, it's already lunchtime, but for me as a national of ethnic Greek, lunch is not before 2 p.m. But I promise I will finish earlier, than that. Yeah, I have quite a few things to say, but I'm very lucky to have been preceded by important presentations that have addressed pretty much everything that has been on the table so far. But again, I have written quite an ambitious, title over there, and I'm afraid I will fall short of what I have been advertising in my title there. But I'll make that, quite fast. I have still a story to say, to tell you. I'm going to talk, despite being a statistician, I'm going to talk about legal aspects today, okay? So as many people said before me, especially in the morning panel, in order to address the challenges that are linked to children on the move, we need, on one hand, lawyers and statisticians on the other hand. Lawyers, we need unifying the legal frameworks that can communicate with each other, and also statisticians, they need common standards that can also talk to each other in an effective way. So I'm not going to repeat, how important trafficking also in numbers of children remains also in Europe. And what are the issues? I'm going to flow directly to the. I'm going to go directly to a helicopter view of what is the legal artillery in the European Union, and how can this seriously be an enabler, or that's my story, or an impediment when it comes to tracking the flows of migrants, and especially children migrants, in the world and across Europe in particular. Okay, I'm pushing the wrong button, I think. Yeah, that's it. So the scale is important, okay? And child migrants are the most vulnerable. I will not have to repeat that. I will also I will only have to talk about the challenges in data collection that we had, which are linked to essentially underreporting, to fragmented data sources, and of course the difficulties of identifying children who go missing or become untraceable. So what are the players here? Of course, on one hand, we have the environment, which is the legal environment of the anti-trafficking directive and the conventions of the rights of the child. And on the other hand, at the European level, we have the institutional players, which are on the data front, are Eurostat, and on the enforcement, let me put it like that, of the following of the flows, are Frontex, Europol, and Eurojust. I have made a nice, but I just made it, so I don't have it in my slides, apologies, a nice chart here about how you can visualize in terms of any movement of people from one country to the other, regardless of whether this country is outside of the European Union or is inside Europe or European Union or anything. And then you have all of a sudden a conjugate flow of data. You can imagine it like this. You have like people move, and at the same time you have something which is data, okay, that should come with it. And then you can imagine like filters being put on that data. And those filters, when that data comes inside the European Union, are more stringent. Okay? Let me put it like that. Let me tell you why. Filters like, for example, I will go to my first filter there, which is the data protection. The general data protection is the famous or infamous, according to people, GDPR, which is in the European Union, is the first filter that hits the data of people that come in. Okay, the first filter is made for citizens, actually for residents of the European Union, not citizens. You know, my legal advisor would definitely correct me here. But the issue is that the more Mike warns me that I have to finish. Okay. So the point there is that GDPR has been designed to somehow, it's a filter that is designed to protect the data of EU residents. As such, is a filter for deleting data that it is not necessary to remain there for a while. So in that sense, it cannot be I mean, at the first glance, it cannot be something that could work as a facilitator in tracking data of migration flows, and especially children migration flows that, for the reasons that have been very nicely explained by our colleagues here, are even more invisible. So what are we going to do there? Okay, so that's one of the filters that hits our data. The other filter is, of course, that things that have to do with the so-called LED, which is the Law Enforcement Directive, which is the law that applies to the police authorities of the European Union. The third filter that has to do with working of data is the data protection framework in Europe, which is the GDPR for EU institutions. You can think it like that, okay? There is a special GDPR for EU institutions that thing over there. Sorry for rushing, because I tried to save for your lunch, okay? And the special kind of like legal specialized provision that are in place for Europol and Eurojust, they're just enablers for processing sensitive data and combating cross-border crime, which is also the issue that related to the topic that we're discussing. So, going back to my nice scheme that I didn't show you, and because I just made it. So you have, on one hand, flows of people, and on the other hand, you have like data flows that are more and more being hit by filters that are designed to protect the rights of the visible, okay? Not the rights of the invisible. So how we can make it? That's my punchline. How can we make that thing work when, on one hand, we want to have legal safeguards that protect the rights of the visible, and at the same time protect the rights of people who we want them to become visible in the future, okay? Because that's the purpose. How do we do that? How do we reconcile the two purposes of modern states that should operate according to the declarations about human rights of the UN, etc., etc. So some of the answers that I also suspect have been given by my predecessors here. It's maybe to somehow strengthen the data component, okay? So the collection component and the work that has been done on the ground on the collection in order to match, in order to offset, you see, the inherent disadvantage that the legal framework for the visible entails for data retention, for example, okay? So one can think that statistical authorities, okay, this is very bold, and many statisticians here may be happy about that, especially those who work on official statistics. It's bold to say that, for example, statistics authorities could benefit from an enhanced period of retention of data, which will not be hindered, for example, by legal frameworks such as the GDPR, in order to have time to process data as it is. One other thing one could think about is to enhance training and resources for better recording at the border for all border workers, you know, regardless of whether they work for the government or for other agencies. Also implement consistent definitions in the data collection and processes in national statistics offices in general. So I think I was going. Yeah, that's all I have, and of course leverage advanced technology and AI. Okay, I said that. Sorry, and AI technology things. Facilities in order to somehow single out in advance spots on which, you know, you could benefit from and patterns, let me use it like that, in movement, and of course expand the international collaboration, which is always a general, a nice capstone to this kind of talks. And I think I can thank you very much with that. And I think I saved pretty much the lunch, right?
Thank you very much, Athanasios, for this wonderful presentation. So we unfortunately ran out of time for the Q&A session, but if Tamana allows us to take 1 more or 2 more minutes just to take quickly questions and answer them, I will be happy to give you the floor. Mina? Yeah, we have Mina here and my colleague there. Yeah, maybe microphone. So we'll take 2 questions and then we will wrap up. So thank you, Tamana.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for insightful presentation to all of you. My name is Minja Thea Jamari. I'm coming from Statistics Norway. And as a statistician, I just want to offer a short comment or reflection about use of terminology and definitions. I have to say that I'm very pleased with a comment from USCD about term second-generation immigrants. That is not a good one. As statisticians, we don't only produce tables and figures, we also produce definitions, concepts, and it's quite big definitional power in that. So, Statistic Norway, we had faced criticism on term second-generation immigrants because we called the entire group that never immigrated to Norway as the second-generation immigrants. So my point is that we have a power and we have to be aware about that. To all statisticians, be aware of that when you make good definitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mina. So 1 more, maybe there was 1 hand there. Then we will close it.
Yeah, thank you very much, the panelists. I want to quickly address on the issue surrounding the issue of the missing migrant issue. And the first speaker that talked about how to collect this data, actually that has to do with documentation. And she said they collect data to documentation, and of course in that they talk about country of distribution of country of origin and who they are. So considering they are missing, how possible is that? Or dead? Because a dead child without any means of identification, except of course what you said later about if they are accompanied with maybe an adult or something, and you can ask, who is this child that just died? And for the missing, since they are missing, do you ask the point of origin where they left and say, okay, this child left and we have not seen or know the whereabouts. So how do you do that? How is that possible? And of course, issue of statelessness. And I think the person that talk about on UNHCR on statelessness, I think the definition it poses a problem because each country have their laws on determining who is a stateless person. So that may make issue of comparability of data in terms of statelessness difficult. Let's take, for example, Nigeria, where I come from. Maybe a child of a refugee may be stateless because that child is not a citizen of Nigeria. And maybe, for example, now, maybe coming from Cameroon, because we have so many Cameroonian refugees, especially in the southern border, in Nigeria. And since that child is born in Nigeria, cannot be issued Nigerian citizenship, and it's not in Cameroon. And of course, you talk about the nexus, the relationship between vital registration and statelessness. It's a key problem because the vital registration system in Nigeria, issued by the National Population Commission, only give you opportunity to access services like school, health, and doesn't bequeath you the right to citizenship. So that child is still on the threat of being seriously stateless, as it were. Then, of course, look, I think the lady that spoke from University of Georgia have already done great justice to issues surrounding migrant children. She later answered my question during the course of her presentation. Then the last speaker on data protection network is talking about visibility in invisibility. And of course, if I understand him properly, he's talking about the issue of data protection in the European space, in the EU country space, as posing serious problem. I think if we may have the time, I want you to buttress more on what he really meant, because the issue of data protection is meant to establish anonymity, confidentiality, and de-identification of the data. So anything beyond that, I think they're overstepping their bounds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And maybe, Andrea, you want to quickly react to that, and then we will wrap up the session.
Thank you very much for that question. You're completely right. It's very, very difficult to know where the country of origin of a person who died. And just to make a comment, so maybe I wasn't clear enough, but we document deaths and disappearances, so people that go missing, but only when they are presumed dead as well. So everything is fatalities. The only way to identify a person is through forensic methods. So that's the only way to know for certain when the country of origin of a person, when a forensic or a medical examiner has done the proper identification of the body. And that is only possible when the body is recovered. So all the bodies that are not recovered, therefore missing, it's impossible to know the country of origin. We have some information that could be like a proxy. So that information that is given by the people that were accompanying the victims, if they're survivors, they could know, but that's obviously less concrete than a forensic identification. But happy to chat more over the break. Thank you.
Thank you for commenting about the data on statelessness. Yeah, it's true that, but before we go to the data comparability, as you can imagine, it's really hard to collect the data for stateless people. They don't want to be identified because they are afraid, what if they are identified and the governments do some conviction for them? So that's the biggest challenge. That's why we have to work with the governments. So we have to let them know that there will be no harm by included in the national statistics. So like you mentioned, that's why we try to align with the EGRIS recommendation, IROS. So the first thing is terminology, like I mentioned, and another thing is to be aligned with the statistical definition for these disaggregated groups. So again, to have better data for stateless people, the key is to work with the government. One is including them into national statistical system by having them into censuses or other national surveys. So that will be the key, using the IROS, by implementing IROS in different countries. And another one is, like you mentioned, vital registration. So we have better information about the stateless people. And like you mentioned, those refugees and who are statelessness, they are the most vulnerable children. So we have to work on them with the partners and the national governments. Thank you.
Athanasius?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So I would have gone through a lot of more to say, and maybe skip not only lunch but also dinner, about if we were to think about the differences that they find sometimes differences in the understanding of the so-called statistical confidentiality that we care about, and privacy. Okay, so privacy concerns are one thing that are very central to when we talk to individuals and rights, but on the other hand, we have statistical confidentiality. So I'm not thinking about finding a sweet spot, between those two things, like compromising those two, or reconciling. Let me use that word. Now, compromising is not a good word when you talk about security, but but it's about finding some leeway to allow processing of data without compromising privacy concerns, having those privacy concerns being fully in line with the European legislation, but also with the, if deemed adequate, I use a technical term like of adequacy in legal terms, equivalent to GDPR to other countries, for example. So in order to do our work, in order to have as much time that, or as much data that we need to do our work. So I'm not proposing something that would somehow shatter the world of protecting privacy data to the detriment, I mean, that would help us statisticians to the detriment of privacy. Not at all. Privacy is something very essential. It rightfully exists there, and it has been a conquest for us, okay? And it should be in that way that it should be interpreted. And it should be in that way it could work as an enabler and not as an impediment to data processing. And I hope I have replied to your question. I mean,
thank you so much, Athanasios. So one of my favorite proverbs is one that says it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to also come with innovative solutions to address the data gaps on children and the most vulnerable children, whether they are stateless, missing children, or smuggled, or etc. etc. So, and one of the key takeaways from this session for me was coming up with new and stronger estimates from the technical side, improving our processes, the issue of legislative and policy framework, if need be, collaboration, making also children and other population groups participate in research processes, as Dr. Gabriela highlighted. And so with that, I would like you to help me congratulate our fantastic speakers and thank them for their great presentations, and also saying thank you to Dr. Gabriela, who stayed up very, very late to be able to present and be with us. So thank you so much. And with that, I will just close the session. Merci.